CCP meeting. We'll start today with a call to order of the meeting. So, Madam Clerk, would you please take a roll call of the CCP Executive Committee?
Can you hear me?
We can now, yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This is Julie Dockler, clerk. I will take roll call. Chief Frugnick.
Here.
Member Blacklock. You need to unmute yourself, Pat.
Here.
Thank you. Member Pogledich.
So I'm here, but I'm not actually a member of the executive committee. I'm just counsel to it. I believe Pat is staffing it in the same capacity, not as a member.
Okay, and also Supervisor Provenza is also attending.
He would not be. It would be the myself.
Right.
Do you want me to go through the list, Dan, or you got it in front
Yes,
of you?
please, Phil. Do you mind?
That's
okay.
Now. Sorry. Okay. Member Jonathan Raven.
I'm here, thanks.
Member Ron Johnson.
I'm here.
Thank you. Member John Miller.
I'm here.
Thank you. Member Rocio Vega.
She is not, well, the court is here, but yes, they did email me earlier today, and they're unfortunately not going to be able to make this meeting.
Okay, thank you. And member Karen Larson.
So Karen just emailed me. That's part of the delay. She is online on the Zoom. However, she's not listed as a participant. So I don't know how we change that so she can participate.
Well, let me look in the attendees and see if she's listed here. Okay, I don't see her name. Is she calling in by a phone number? If she can, just give us like the last 4 digits of her phone number, and then we could transfer her over as a panelist.
It appears as though she's from a blocked number.
Okay, well, we have one that just says call in user 2 also, so I don't know if that's her or not.
All right, trying to communicate
That's
with her.
me, I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome, Karen. So repeat, if you could change call in user 2 to Karen Larson, then we can transfer her over as a panelist. So she's here then, okay? Thank you, Karen. I'll mark you as here. And we have member Johnson.
Here.
Okay, thank you. That was Dale Johnson, correct? Oh, yes, there he is. I see him. Okay.
That's correct.
And then I think that's it. And then Eric Will is here attending as the, not as a member, but just as the staff.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're here. We're accounted for.
And 6, thank you. A few housekeeping issues to go over real quick, then we'll get going. Today's CCP meeting is being held telephonically pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number N2920 issued on March 17th, 2020. The order allows governing bodies of local agencies to hold their meetings electronically, provided that members of the public can also observe and provide public comment electronically. Here are a few guidelines that will allow our meeting to run efficiently. Other than executive committee members, all lines will be muted and unmuted by the moderator. CCP executive committee members and staff shall state your name each time you are speaking. While we may know each other's voices, the public may not. Executive committee members who wish to speak should notify me in a brief manner. Example would be CAO Blacklock with a question or comment. I will recognize the person to speak, at which time they have the floor. Other members should not speak until that speaker has finished. We will have public comment after each agendized item, which brings us to our first action item, which is to consider the approval of the agenda. I hope everyone's had time to take a look at the agenda. And if they have, Can we get a motion to approve?
Hey, Dan, it's Jonathan. Just before we get there, so, there's some members of the CCP that are not executive, and it's listed out, they're listed out in the statute. I think we have Garth here from Superintendent of YCOE, and they're a required member, as is a victims rep, and I think Laura Valdez is here. They're members of the CCP. Why is it that they cannot comment?
So, Jonathan, this is Phil Pogledich. They can comment, and this is an issue I think we need to revisit after the meeting, just in terms of how we agendize these and this statutory distinction between the CCP and the CCP Executive Committee. The main difference is the CCP Executive Committee is just a bit smaller. It doesn't include the superintendent of schools, for example. And the Executive Committee, its function is to develop and approve a plan, the strategic plan, that goes to the board for consideration. Whereas the CCP itself, as you're noting, is bigger and has somewhat different statutory authority going back to 2009 or so. But they can absolutely participate in this meeting. It's really more a question of what their function is, and specifically that it's, as it relates to the strategic plan, they don't have a role in voting on that, although they can provide input into it.
Thanks, Phil. This is Jonathan again. I'm reading the statute, 1230.1. If you read the statute, it does not say the executive committee creates the plan. It says the full CCP creates the plan. So they should be involved in the plan. So that's what the plain language of the statute says. But I know we have to iron some of that out, because for some reason in the past we haven't had the superintendent or victims rep on the CCP. And I'm not saying they weren't invited, they just haven't participated or weren't invited, I don't know. But I think it's important to note that they are part of the plan, creating the plan. It doesn't say the executive committee under section A.
Well, that's fine. And subsection B specifies who votes on the plan. But in terms of creating the plan, anybody can provide input into it, including the members of the full CCP that you mentioned, as well as the public.
I think, Dan, that's a good point that's raised, that Phil mentions that we're going to need to provide some clarity on when the CCP Executive Committee is meeting in the future versus the full CCP. And just by way of history, I can't remember a time in the last 5+ years when the full CCP met, and maybe once or twice in the last 10 years. And it's more than just the two members that Jonathan mentioned. There's additional members that we want to be included as well, should the full CCP meet. There may be a very good reason to have them meet, to have a more diverse body participating in the discussion leading up to what's recommended to the CCP Executive Committee. And I can see how the confusion lies, because we've drifted into this path where we notice it as the CCP, but in reality, the past practice has been it's the Executive Committee for the last 5+ years.
No, and I agree, and I think there's definitely merit for the larger group to meet on a consistent basis moving forward. As far as today, Phil, do I move forward with them on it, or?
You know, the only action item, correct me if I'm wrong, is item 6, where we are receiving a status update on the strategic plan and providing input. Providing input, I mean, frankly, anybody can provide input, but under the statute, as I read it, I'm okay. I'm going to step back just a little. Since it's a matter of providing input on the strategic plan, any member, including public attendees, can provide input. I think that agenda item might have envisioned the input would come from the executive committee, as it's the executive committee that has the purview to vote on the plan. But input itself can come from anyone. I don't know if I helped you with that answer, Dan, but in short, you can take input from whoever's present here today on the items on the agenda.
But isn't it true, Phil and Dan, that the input from the public is separate, and we don't really comment on that? We just listen to their public input. But the members, whether they're executive or not, can comment during the discussion. Public, I don't believe, is, under the Brown Act, or is commenting during the discussion. Is that correct?
Yeah, it depends on how Dan wants to run the meeting, but yeah, typically the members of the public would be allowed to comment at a specific time, whereas members of we've agendized this as a meeting of the full CCP, and my recommendation to Dan would be to allow the full membership, including members that are not on the executive committee but part of the full CCP, to provide input as the matter is discussed by the group rather than simply as members of the public.
Okay, well, with that being said, then I believe we have Yolo County Office of Education Superintendent Garth Lewis on the meeting with us. And I believe we have Victims Advocate Lori Valdez on with us as well, which would
I don't
be,
know if you have Danny Bay from Communicare, but I think that in the past, that Communicare member was also part of the full CCP. And then in addition, I know we have a number of alternates on, but I don't know how clear the statute is on the role of alternates. So that's something we'll need to probably have clarified at a future meeting as well. And then for council, I don't know that either 5 or 6 were envisioned as action items, but rather a chance for the committee to provide feedback. Just wanted to provide that clarity that we didn't anticipate that they would be action items.
Yeah, and I was trying to interpret 6 as an action item of sorts in that it contemplates input, but looking at it, I think the input was, it could come from anybody, whether it's a member of the executive committee, full CCP, or a member of the public.
okay, it does appear to me that Garth and Laura are on the panel. Is that correct? Garth, can you hear us? Laura, can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you just fine. Thank you.
Yeah, they're part of the full CCP under the statute.
Okay, so then they can make comments and move forward at this point. I was going to do it, or Phil, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to do member announcements and introduce them, but we'll wait until that section, and then we'll do quick introductions of them. So with that being said, we still waiting. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for today? Can I get a first?
Tough crowd, Dan.
Yeah, it's.
This is Karen. I'll move.
Thank you.
I'll
Karen
second.
moves the
This is
motion.
Dale. I'll second.
Dale seconds it. Motion passes, which leads us to agenda item number 3, which is public comment. At this point in the meeting, the CCP accepts comments from the public on items that are not on our agenda. State law limits our ability to respond to comments. For public comment, if you are joining by PC, you will see a button to raise your hand. If you are joining by phone only, you will need to press *9 to raise your hand. I will call the public either by the name they entered or on the phone number they're calling from. Once I call your name, the clerk will unmute the line to allow you to comment. Speakers are requested, but not required, to state their name and city of residence for the record and limit their comments to 3 minutes. Once the speaker is done, you will be muted, and I will move on to the next speaker. With that being said, is there any public comment?
I do not have any hands raised, Chair.
Okay. At this point, there's no public comment. We'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is member announcements. Are there any member announcements that anyone would like to announce? Not hearing any. Jonathan, I believe you mentioned earlier you might have one.
Yeah, I was debating whether to.
Oh, okay.
I'll mention it briefly. So I think many of you on the executive committee and the CCP are aware of our work with Measures for Justice. They're based in New York. Their platform is really about transparency and data. And we've been working with them for a number of months. They came into our office for about 2 weeks and looked at all our data, talked to us, and then to help them figure out what they were going to do and what they were going to build, which is a transparency portal that the public could use to look at all sorts of data, charges, arrests by race, by by gender, by all sorts of different things, and it's interactive. They actually met with members of our multicultural community council. It looks like we're set to launch. I sent something out today from Measures for Justice, and we're set to launch sometime in the winter, which is very exciting. What they've said is that this will be the first such transparency portal, and it's basically, they use the word unprecedented, and that Yolo County, the DA's office, will be the most transparent DA's office in the country once we do this, and they're going to use this as a model to build similar portals for other DA's offices. So that's really exciting, and a lot of the data is being gathered by all of you. So thank you for your help. Thanks.
Sounds good. Any other members with an update or announcement? I'll move forward with mine. We've already kind of covered it to some extent, but the CCP enabling statute indicates who is on the CCP. Two of those members are the head of the County Office of Education and also a victim advocate. And to that extent, we have Superintendent Garth Lewis and Laura Valdez, victims advocate, with us, joining us today and into the future. Both Garth and Laura have been providing services and dedicated to the community for years now. They are hardworking, passionate, knowledgeable professionals in their area of expertise, to say the least. And so we're excited to have them joining us as well. I don't know, Garth or Laura, if you want to say anything. You don't have to, but if you would like to. Does not look like...
So good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this afternoon, and I look forward to learning from our colleagues on the council about the work of this particular committee, as well as contributing from our perspective, my perspective as an educator. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
And I want to mimic what Garth just said. I'm very excited to be part of the team. This is something that the CCP has been on our radar, and Victim Services has been very involved in providing services to victims that fall under CCP. So I'm very excited to be joining the meetings and start contributing more. So thank you for having me.
I thank both of you. All right, next up is agenda number 5. Receive Yolo County Results First Initiative Report. And for that, I'll turn it over to CCP analyst Eric Will.
Hi, so good afternoon, everyone, CCP members and members of the public. My name is Eric Will. I am an analyst with the County Administrator's Office, as well as the analyst assigned to the Community Corrections Partnership. So today I'll be providing a fairly brief update on the Results First initiative, which started back in 2018. And this year we've had a chance to wrap up at least the initial report, which includes several pieces to it, including a recidivism study, a program inventory, as well as a cost-benefit analysis. So today I'll be going over the general concept of Results First, as well as some of the results that we found so far. I will note that it's exciting where we're at right now with this reporting, because this has really been the effort and outcome of a collaborative of county departments, the district attorney's office, health and human services, probation, public defender, sheriff, CAO, as well as ITS and the courts. And so we're just really excited to be moving forward with this work. I'll note that this work is not done yet. This work is still continuing for the foreseeable future as we see it. But this is really just a milestone in the fact that we have some data now that we didn't have previously, and we're excited to move forward with it. So without further ado, if we could go to the next page, please. Thank you. So let's quickly move through this report. And I'll note that this report is actually online, available to anyone on the CCP's website, which can be found on the agenda for the CCP today, as well as within the attachments. So we do ask that people go and take a look at this report. It's pretty extensive, and so today I'm not going to go over everything just in terms of timing, but just getting started on this. So first we have the recidivism study. This is the first component of the Results First initiative, which really focused on just getting us a baseline recidivism rate for Yolo County. And so this recidivism study examined recidivism in intervals of up to 6 years and included bookings, charges filed, and convictions as part of our definition for recidivism. Each of these pieces were further broken down by violations of probation, as well as those without violations of probation. As I mentioned before, the data may be found on the Results First webpage under the CCP and Yolo County website, so I'd encourage people to take further look at this as well. But I will note that the initial result for Yolo County is that we note that we have a 54% recidivism rate. So recidivism meaning that we have a crime that is reoccurring or a reoffense. And so we note that the Yolo County recidivism rate is 54%, not including violations of probation, which compares to the state value of 54.3%. And if we could actually go down one page, please, I apologize. There is a graph that we can take a look at. Thank you. And so the graph on the right, so the cumulative recidivism rate by year depicts the state versus Yolo County. I will note that the state uses a 3-year tracking mechanism for recidivism. So that's what you see the difference in for the green versus the blue line. And so you'll note that if we were to track Yolo County's recidivism rate, it would stand at 44.5% at the 3-year mark versus the state's mark of 54.3%. So we'll just note for the recidivism study that this is an important piece of data that we've lacked until now for the county. There are still challenges with this data, however, because there are a lot of ways that the data can be used. It can be sliced and diced effectively in many different ways. Individuals can be counted multiple times in one day, which is not accounted for in this model. Out of county information on recidivism can be difficult to acquire, and age ranges actually make a difference. So if someone comes in, commits a crime at a certain age but moves into another age range, the way that we track data can be difficult in measuring. So this is all to say that the data can be complicated, but these numbers reflect what we have as accurately as possible for the recidivism study. And I'll just note that this was a very close collaboration between county ITS as well as the criminal justice departments over the last year and a half. And so we will be talking a lot about data today. So I just want to note that within data, this recidivism study is a really good first step as we move toward really transparency and accountability within our data for Yolo County. So if we could go to the next page, please.
Can I ask a question, Eric?
Absolutely.
Or I should say, Dan, is it okay if I ask a question, Chief Nick?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So Eric, you have become the data czar of our county, so thank you. I was wondering we had 3 ways, I believe we were measuring recidivism, and it might be in there the way you measured it, but I think there's only one way that you measured it, I assume, in that graph, unless you averaged the 3. How did you measure recidivism? I mean, is it based on arrests, which we wanted? Is it based on convictions, which is the CPOC model, or something else?
Yeah, so it is based on convictions, and it's actually, I apologize, it's very small on the screen, but if you see the graph, it says cumulative recidivism rate by year, and then underneath that in the tiny, tiny text, it says based on convictions. So that is what this graph is depicting.
Eric, I do believe, though, that the study, and I don't know, I think Mike Wilson's online potentially, it counted the 3 prongs for bookings, filed charges, and convictions.
Right. So
that included fresh offenses, and it included technical violations of probation. And it was the the cumulative of all of those. That's my understanding. But
okay, I will double check that. I can get back to you on that. I believe it is convictions for this chart, but I'll double check on that.
Yeah, if it is, we do need to take a look at that, because our agreement with everybody was that we would do the 3 prongs throughout those years. So I know we have that data. So we'll have to potentially take a look at this for sure.
Right. And I will note, yes, we do have all the data online. So all of the three that we use are actually, it's available. It's just that this chart in particular is convictions. So I'll just make that note that is available. So if we wanted to make 2 more charts, we could. I think it was just, this was the decision for the chart itself. Okay, great. So if we could go down to the next page, please. Thank you. Perfect. So the program inventory is the second component of results first. Program inventory is a catalog of programs employed by the Probation Department, HHSA, or Health and Human Services, and the Sheriff's Department that are matched to the results first clearinghouse. So the clearinghouse system is a multitude of research databases that provide national evaluations that categorize the effectiveness of a given program on the reduction of recidivism. And so the way that this works is that the county spent many months and weeks collaborating on this, so putting together all of the data for the programs that we currently have, as well as matching them to the clearinghouse data. And so I'll note that if a program did not match to the clearinghouse data, it is included in the program inventory itself, which you can find online, but it is not part of the calculation of the model because we needed to make sure that it would fit within the accounting of the model itself. So we do note the programs that we're doing because we think it's important to state all of that we are doing. But just to fit within the model, there were certain programs that matched better based on the research itself. So we couldn't necessarily say something that doesn't have research, we couldn't give it the backing that it would require. So we wanted to make sure that these actually matched up with the evidence that is provided from the research. And as I'll note again, the entire program inventory may be viewed on the CCP Results First webpage. And so if you'd like to take a look at this within the different programs, you can see which ones are considered highest rated or second highest rated, or if there's no effect, just to see what the county is currently doing. And with that, if we could move to the next page, please. And one more, please. I think we have a couple to move down to. We'll move down to, and let's go actually 2 more, please, to the cost benefit analysis. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So the final piece of the Results First initiative is the cost benefit analysis, or the CBA, which represents the culmination of the recidivism study, the program inventory, as well as a calculation of resource cost. So what cost is borne by our departments for the programs that they're utilizing, as well as resource use, which is the probability of sentencing outcomes resulting from felony and misdemeanor convictions as a result of recidivating events. So all of these things combined are put together into the cost benefit analysis to illustrate the effectiveness of existing Yolo County programs to a certain extent. I will note that for the county, we did have to utilize other counties' data, so aggregate data from other counties that have completed Results First, because we were unable to obtain some of the data for this year. But I note that moving forward, we would anticipate filling in the gaps that we couldn't get to within the time frame of finishing this study, which would allow us to get a little bit more accurate data as well as more current data for continuing to collect this over time. And so I'd note just that when looking at this Results First initiative study overall, it's an effective tool for looking at how we might change policy within the county. It's also just to be noted that there are certain restrictions on the data of which were available at the time. But I anticipate that as we move forward, especially as we look toward the strategic plan, that we will have more access to data as we move forward as a county. And so I just like to note a couple of final things about Results First before I finish this up. It's just that it was a great collaborative and learning effort for, I think, all involved. It's been a challenge to complete Results First because a lot of this is just either new data that we haven't tried to collect before, or it's just data that we haven't collected all in the same way before. And so I think a couple of learning lessons from this is just that as we move forward, data collection, data management, data sharing are all very important to the CCP members from what I'm learning in conversations with everyone. And I think this really is going to be reflected in our CCP strategic plan that we'll be discussing in a few minutes. as well as the budget itself. And there was just a couple of recommendations that came out of the Results First initiative as well. So if we could just go down one more page, please. These just are the 4 recommendations at the bottom. And so really looking at evidence-based practices, the definition might be for Yolo County specifically, looking at how we might continue to do our research and evaluation, looking at developing a countywide set of performance metrics that are connected to our evidence-based practice definition as what's moving forward, and then also just looking to build capacity to monitor and respond to program fidelity issues and help build capacity. And so really to make sure that we are looking at what we're doing right now, what our existing programs are, and to make sure that we can move forward with data because it's really important as we move forward with how we spend our money and how we spend our time. And so I'll just note before I finish up that this item will actually be going to the Board of Supervisors as well on September 1st. That's when staff anticipates taking this. I anticipate that it'll be a longer presentation as well as a workshop with the board. And so anyone on this call, we are excited to continue this conversation if anyone would like to join for that meeting on September 1st. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or receive comments at this time. Thank you.
Eric, this is Jim Provenza. I notice on a number I'm looking at page 4, on a number of these items, they list highest rated and then second highest rated on a number of these for individual categories. Can you tell me why that's the case?
Absolutely. So when matching to the Results First clearinghouse, there's actually, I believe, 7 or 8 clearinghouses that are combined into the overall clearinghouse. And so there can actually be multiple levels of ratings. And so they actually can have 2 ratings, although generally when using for the model, you would use the highest rated. That's what Results First uses. But we just wanted to make sure that we were illustrating that it does actually have combinations. So based on different studies, there can be different outcomes.
And these are studies that have been conducted elsewhere regarding the programs that we have in our county.
That is correct, or at least as close of a match to that program that is acceptable. Yes.
And then the data we use from other counties, that has to do with cost, for example, of jail, sheriff, probation, and so forth, where we had missing data or unavailable data.
It does. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
With that,
I'm sorry, I had one more question. Then, just so it took me a little bit to understand this. I was almost, I think, reading it the opposite. So I want to make sure everybody in the public understands when we've take an item on page 8, for example, literacy training, that's list $12.92. That's the benefit for each dollar that we spend, correct? So we're saying that we gain a $12.92 benefit for every dollar we spend on literacy training.
Correct.
Okay. And then corresponding to that is the amount of recidivism reduction.
Exactly.
So on the other hand, we get for example, drug court, we get a $1.07 benefit, but then a 21% recidivism reduction. So are we looking at both the dollar benefit and the amount of recidivism reduction in judging the benefit of the program?
I think they're both important, yes. And I think I say that because of the overall cost per participant can vary wildly. And so if you're looking at how you might do your budget, but you only have a certain amount to go towards, say, a smaller program, you would still want to know, what the cost per participant is, as well as the reduction as well. So I'd say both are very important.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Open it up to other CCP members before turning it over to the public for comments. Does anybody else have any comments on the CCP team? Hearing none, I will open it up for public comment on this agenda item. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments?
Yes, we have Francesca Wright.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Wright.
She needs to unmute herself.
Okay. Ms. Wright, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, looks like she's unmuted, but
Okay.
that's right.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, now we can, yes.
Okay, great. Apologies for that. It's really encouraging to see that this kind of analysis has been done. I believe it has some good news and bad news, and the best news is that it has been done. And I think moving more into a results-based accountability and evidence-based approach is critical. I was also very interested in seeing the attached Excel spreadsheets and was surprised that in so many of our programs are under-enrolled. I would be curious as to why they are under-enrolled. I was also dismayed that only one of the programs had any formal evaluation as a program, and I understand there's budget restrictions on program evaluation, but it's critical if we're going to get our recidivism rates improved. To me, 54% is horrible. I know it's the state average and it's horrible. This is just it just demonstrates that our people in our jail are not getting the services they need to successfully re-enter into our communities. And I believe the whole premise of the existence of community corrections partnerships is to reduce recidivism. And if more than half are coming back within 5 years, I think it's a failure. And so I want to ask, what are your goals and objectives? Do you have a point of where you're trying to get your recidivism rates? Are you satisfied with 54%? I would like to hear the partnership come up with a very specific goal and to put your resources into the programs that are promising and cut them from programs that don't have evidence of success. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Do we have any other public comments? Lupita, anybody else?
Sorry, Chair. Messi Soprano.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Prado.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I've been having some technical difficulties. This is Robin. I am actually on my phone, but I'm looking at the graphic on the on my computer because it's really difficult to see. I guess my biggest thing is kind of seconding what Francesca was saying. My biggest concern is that the recidivism that we're seeing are a lot of things that can be addressed by social services. And in the bigger picture and the bigger scheme of things, a lot of the drug and DUI recidivism, property recidivism, misdemeanor recidivism, the large numbers of people, those are all things that are linked to poverty and social issues. And my biggest thing is that I'm concerned that we're focused so much on how all this recidivism, that it exists, and not how to really address that. Some of that can be addressed by investing in things at the front end, rehabilitative programs, things while incarcerated, or even whether or not there even needs to be incarceration for these things. So I guess I really, I kind of second what she said about the fact that it's good that we're looking at this, but also to think of the larger picture. It's really easy when you're sitting in a room full of a bunch of people who are law enforcement officers to kind of go, oh my gosh, like this is a lot of recidivism. Coming from somebody who's worked in criminal justice and kind of the linkage between social issues, to me, I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, that's a lot of recidivism that we can address through addressing social issues. I'd love to see much more investment on the front end so that we don't have to deal with so much on the back end. And so when I look at a report like this, I really want us to look at that. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's really important to have public comment. I know you guys had that argument in the beginning of this session, but it's partially because it's really easy to get a worldview that is focused only on one aspect of it. Public comment can help with that. As somebody who does not have an entryway except through public comment at this point in time, I have a lot of experiences that that really directly address these type of issues. And my worldview is really important to being able to address this systemically. And so I want to really endorse that public comment is really important to this type of process. And also thank you for doing the work, and let's look at it from a more a holistic perspective. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Next, Lupita.
I don't have any more hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up one last time for CCP member comments if they have any. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, receive status update on CCP strategic plan and provide input on CCP budget priorities. First up will be CCP analyst Eric Will.
Okay, hi again, everyone. Eric Will with the County Administrator's Office. So I'll be providing a short update on the CCP strategic plan progress. And so just a pretty quick one here, and then I'll pass it over to County Administrator Blacklock as well as Chair Fruchnick. So first, we'll go over the CCP strategic plan, which runs from 2019 to 2022. And so we're in the middle of our most current strategic plan. And so I'll note on the front end here that many of these efforts will be in progress and not completed because we've still got a little bit of time to go. Also note that with COVID-19, there are many programs that require in-person meetings or have been slowed down due to COVID in order to deal with the emergency response that the pandemic has created. And so with that in mind, I'd just like to note the CCP strategic plan has 3 major goals. The first is to ensure a safe environment for all residents and visitors by reducing and preventing local crime and reducing recidivism, as we just discussed. The second is to restore victims in the community and hold offenders accountable. And finally, the third is to build offender competency and support community reintegration. And so the way that I'll do this is rather than going through each of these items exhaustively, I'd just like to highlight a few of the items from each of the goals as we move through this, and then happy to answer any questions at the very end of the item. And so we'll go through the strategic plan first, and then we'll discuss the budget, and then go with questions and comments if that works for the chair. So we'll go to the top of the document really quickly, please. Thank you. Great. So under goal 1, I just wanted to highlight the second action under objective 1A. So partner with criminal justice continuum of care work group to identify future service needs and arising issues in the criminal justice system. And so I'll note that back in July of this year, there was a great collaborative presentation done by the partners of the CCP as well as our child welfare services relating to the sequential intercept map and the data-driven recovery project. And so this is a really big effort that's been going on for some time now, but I think we've seen a great milestone occur as of July of this year. And so looking forward to continue with our data efforts specifically for this item. Next, I'll note the first item under objective 1D. So if we can go to the next page. Perfect, thank you. So as we just discussed, we've made major progress with CSAC, or the California State Association of Counties, as it relates to the Results First partnership and the initiative. And so just wanted to note that the report is considered complete for the initial report, but that there is continuing work to be done as it relates to Results First. And then finally, I'll note for objective 1E that the Public Defender and Probation Department have been working on evaluating the school to prison pipeline and best practices for the family model. And so I believe a couple of interns from the Public Defender's Office have been working on this. So we're excited to see this work coming forward, and we'd expect these items to come back to the CCP in the future. And if we could move down to the next page, please, we'll discuss goal number 2. Thank you. So first I'll note objective 2B. So implement a probation case management system. So we're excited to note that the probation case management system is continuing with an increased focus on data sharing, as well as using a position of an IT programmer to make sure that technology is focusing on reporting and analytics. And so really we're just data in everything we do, and really focusing in on this with the case management system. And next, I'll just point out objective 2D, which represents a collaboration between all the CCP partners to competitively apply for grants and expand neighborhood courts. So really excited about the programs that are going on within this goal as well. And then finally, we'll discuss goal 3 quickly. And let's move down to the next page really quick. Thank you. Great, so under objective 3C and 3D, so expand housing investments to assist with offender reentry as well as safely reduce the number of people with mental illness in the jail system. I'll just note that we've had major success in applying for grants totaling in over $2.6 million to increase diversionary housing as well as mental health illness and or substance abuse disorder clients. And so both the probation department and Health and Human Services are working on these grants right now. And just really excited about the fact that we've been so competitive for these programs and that we are going to continue to look and address housing as it's really needed for these clients. And finally, I'll just note, if we go down one more page, please. Excuse me. Looking at 3E, so as we're in an election year, it's very important. This is a very important objective. And so I'm happy to say that probation, sheriff, and elections are all working to develop and implement voter registration and education within the jail for in and out of custody individuals. And so just really excited to see that moving forward as we move toward November, but also just the future for those in the jail. And so I just want to note that staff shall continue to work on these goals and objectives set forth in this plan, and we will be returning to the CCP with updates periodically. As we get closer to 2022, staff anticipate updating this plan and going through a process to receive new member and public feedback to inform the next iteration of this plan. I also just want to thank all of the CCP members for their input into the strategic plan update. There was a lot of work that's gone into filling this in, as well as just the continued partnerships for making this plan possible. And so with that, I'll end my quick report and pass this over to CAO Blacklock.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that and appreciate the report. And I know we'll have a chance for the members to have some conversation around what's in the plan if they want to. But we wanted to also talk about this year's budget process. As you may remember, when the CCP Executive Committee last met, I think it was February, if I'm remembering correctly, pre-COVID, they had a session that was devoted to kind of reorienting the CCP Executive Committee. The CCP Executive Committee over time had taken on increasing responsibility. And at that time, they decided to come back to what the statutory role is, which is to guide the development of the strategic plan, work that they had done, and they agreed to meet quarterly to check in on the plan. That then left the Chief Probation Officer and myself in the role of bringing forward a recommended budget for consideration by the Board of Supervisors, and now preparing to bring forward a budget for the board to consider as part of the adopted budget. And today is really a chance to check in and see how the budget syncs up with the CCP Executive Committee's guidance around the plan, and then to hear any feedback that the committee may have that Chief Probation Officer and I can use to continue to refine the budget scenarios that we'll take to the board. The next step with the Board of Supervisors will be at the first meeting in September to review a draft outline of the budget, to get the board's feedback, and then ultimately to bring it back as part of the adopted budget hearing at the second meeting in September. We do have a budget in place. The recommended budget was adopted by the board in June, and that is in the packet. You'll have a spreadsheet in your packet, and you'll note the first blue column says 2021 recommended budget. The expenditure lines are the appropriations that were adopted by the Board of Supervisors as part of the June budget. But we have adjusted the revenue and at the bottom, the backfill to reflect actual conditions. Or put differently, the original June budget had 8.2 million, if I'm remembering right, for AB 109 revenue. And we know now that this will be the first year, I think, since 2011 when that revenue has gone down and down to 7.8 as a result of the recession. So we'll need to adjust for that actual revenue figure. But the legislature did include a backfill as part of the state budget this year, and that shows the second to last line at the bottom of 513,000. And that means that the recommended budget as it stands today, as adjusted for those two impacts, is 96,000 in the hole, basically. So then I asked the chief to work with me to put together what we might refer to as a strategically aligned budget. That is a budget that seeks to align to the CCP strategic plan. And the main thing we looked at there was, are there any key initiatives that the CCP Executive Committee had identified that weren't funded? And if so, should those be funded, and what would they need to be funded at? And to include those in a revised budget. So that's what that second column is a scenario to look at what might the budget look like if we were to fund some of those initiatives and get the fund back into balance. And so you'll note at the start, it starts with the same revenue and the same fund balance rolling forward, but the appropriations change based on those recommendations and adjustments. And then when we get down to the bottom and we add back in the one-time realignment backfill, in this case, there's a $388,000 positive ending fund balance. And why that's important is we look forward to next year. You can go to the last column, the tan column. You can see that the CCP budget has long relied on a healthy fund balance to balance. And if we zero it out, then we're going to exacerbate this. If you go to the bottom of the tan column, the negative fund balance that potentially lies ahead at the end of 21-22. So there's a couple of guiding things for the CCP to consider today in this discussion. One is that revenue has declined. And second is the question of, should we be trying to align the budget more with the initiatives that are in the strategic plan? So with that guidance, I'll turn it to Dan to walk us through the individual elements of those two scenarios. I'll just say again that today is meant to be a check-in to get feedback, and that this is by no means final. This is to put something before you to get your feedback from, so that Dan and I can continue to refine it and take a recommendation forward to the Board of Supervisors in September. Dan?
Thank you. If we can scroll back up to the top of the document. Patrick went over the recommended budget and shows that if we spend how it was recommended and used all our beginning fund balance and backfill, we would still have a structural deficit at the end of the year. I'll start off with the align to the strategic plan, the 2021 budget, and I'll go down the lines and explain some of the thought process behind some of those recommendations. On the far right of the document under notes, there are quite a few notes, and some of those line up with what those categories are. For instance, with probation for case management, it looks 1A, 1E, 2B, etc. And those line up with the strategic plan. Not all the categories do, and there are some categories that are in between. So when going through this process, what we were trying to look at is we were trying to address the current economic situation and structural deficit. We were trying to align the CCP budget more with the strategic plan, knowing that it would be impossible to do it all in 1 year, but I believe some of these changes will get us going in the right direction. Also to create a fund balance going in the next fiscal year. As Pat said, we are looking at a tough situation next year as well, and that fund balance will help ensure that the vital programs to our clients can remain in effect and won't have to see massive reductions to those. Also taking into consideration the reality of current programming and staffing, how the budget's been built over the years and what's built upon the budget. So all of those things were taken into consideration when we were discussing how to make this budget and the recommendations. So with that, I'll just start going down the line. The fund balance remains the same as the recommended. The total revenues remain the same. The first noted change would be to the district attorney's office and proposing a $71,000 reduction for high tech. Now, high tech doesn't line up perfectly with strategic plan. It doesn't mean that it's not necessary, that they do great work, that it's important to the overall system. But when looking at reductions being necessary, it's an area that we are proposing for a reduction. If you go down to the library next, they did not request any funding for this fiscal year, so we did back that out to zero. Next up is probation, and I'm proposing to reduce the probation budget by $345,000, primarily in case management. Over the last couple of years, we've realized a year-over-year reduction in the amount of clients on our rosters. In calendar year 2019, we had a total of 254 PRCS clients, 207 1170 clients, and 812 felony probation clients. Those numbers are down year over the last couple of years. That's why I'm proposing a reduction in those areas. Can you scroll down a little bit, please? Next up is the public defender. That department has a allocation of 155,000, almost 156,000, primarily for a social worker, but also for administrative support. Now, I put that under workload costs, and that does not align with the strategic plan. However, giving the overall public defenders small portion of the allocated funds, not proposing to reduce those this year. Next up is the sheriff, proposing a reduction of $324,000 in jail bed days. How I came to that number is I took the rate that it costs to have a person in custody, which is about $166, times it by the total number of AB 109 beds last year, which was a little over 24,000, divided that in two and carried it as a workload cost. If I actually do that math and without dividing it by two, it's actually quite a bit more cost to house those individuals than it is for what's being allocated in this column. Keeping the electronic monitoring whole. Next up goes to treatment. Do you mind scrolling down just a little bit more? Thank you. Treatment. It is an increase. We still have the day reporting center. We still have the overall treatment budget, the IGT house, the diversionary housing project, which last year the county received a grant to purchase 2 houses. We anticipate doing that in early spring. This would be to do the yearly maintenance and upkeep on those houses. We also had to put in the mental health court grant match, which is $52,000 for this year. Next is the CAO analyst position, reducing that by 50%, so cutting $31,000 out of that budget line item as well. Next up in the yellow boxes to your left are new proposals. And in trying to align the budget with the strategic plan, I went through various areas that are in the strategic plan and we could potentially put budget behind and start moving in that direction. These are not locked in. These are just recommendations. Obviously, we want everybody's feedback. If it makes sense to move in a different direction or different categories, for sure, we can potentially move things around there. But the first up is neighborhood support programs. We have that under 1E of the strategic plan. And in a lot of meetings we go to, I've been going to over the past year, there's the talk about, again, getting upstream. This would potentially give, for instance, we could put out 2 $40,000 RFPs, maybe one in West Sacramento and one in Woodland, and get proposals, things as Woodland POW. There's other things that are out there, and we would convene and we would decide once we get the proposals which one we wanted to run with. The next one up is the parenting program, and the probation department has instructors that are certified in the parent project model. Now this $5,000 would not be for staff or salaries or anything like that. It would be for parental supports. In our prior classes, we've had family members that are in the far sides of the county that don't have fuel, gas money to get to the program. So these would be supports to get them there. Also little incentives and that sort of thing. The next up would be a clinician for the sheriff's and probation department to share, to respond. We don't respond to calls, but the sheriff department does. And for frontline law enforcement to have a clinician embedded. What we do have is we have a lot of residences and people we go see that have mental health issues, and it would also support that as well. The last one I have to be determined. Prior to this filing earlier this week, I had a potential plan for offender link to notify for FTA court hearings and that. Come to find out the public defender's office is already doing this, so I backed that proposal out, but I left the allocation in there to potentially do something with to help further align the budget with the strategic plan. So with those changes, it would give a total expenditures of just shy of 9 million. With the, basically if we went to this case with the reductions, with the new proposals and with the fund balance realignment backfill, we'd have a positive $388,000 to put into fund balance for next year. That was kind of my thought process when proposing this budget. With that, I'll open it up to CCP members for comment, and then we'll do public comment.
Hi, Dan. It's Dale Johnson from the Sheriff's Office requested to speak.
Yes, go ahead, Dale.
Can you tell me how you're thinking on the jail bed rate and why you divided it by 2?
Yes, we knew we had to realize some reductions, and that was just the formula for doing it. We anticipating reductions as far as the number of jail bed days needed due to primarily COVID and zero bail, etc. So that was the math behind that. I fully realize it doesn't cover the total cost for those bed days for AB 109.
Dan, this is Pat. I think, Under Sheriff, it would be helpful if we could work with you in the coming weeks to do a more accurate projection of what you see the actual jail beds being headed into next year with AB 109, and then we can refine that.
Thanks, Pat. I appreciate it.
Other CCP members?
Dan, this is Karen. I just wanted to weigh in and say, you know, for several years we've been talking about aligning our budget more closely with our strategic plan, and I think it's easier to do that when the budget is ripe and a little harder to do it when things are tight. And so I want to acknowledge that I'm sure this wasn't an easy task for you to undertake, and I think it is reflective of our priorities that we've agreed upon and what we've heard from our community as priorities. So I just want to acknowledge the work you put into it, and it seems like it's on the right path.
Other comments?
A question, Jim Provenza. The clinician for sheriff probation, was that in part a match with the Mental Health Services Act proposed allocation for placing workers, mental health or social workers with law enforcement, or is this something different?
Yes, this would be part of that, and maybe Karen can chime back in and help with that answer a little bit, but yes, that would be part of that.
And then
yes,
on
go
ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, Supervisor Provenza, this is just like we're doing with the local law enforcement agencies, the city police departments would be a shared 50-50 cost between Health and Human Services, Mental Health Services Act dollars, and the CCP AB 109 dollars.
Okay. And then the parenting programs, are we looking at supporting some existing? I know there are some existing programs out there that are funded by the county proper, and then also First Five money. Are we talking about strengthening those programs or doing something new? I know it's a relatively small amount of money.
Yes, my thought behind that was to use our internal certified instructors with the probation department and continue to run those programs. Now, we haven't had one since the COVID pandemic, but prior to that, 4 times a year, we would have an English-speaking class and then a Spanish-only class 4 times a year. But we could look at supporting other existing programs as well. Again, these are just kind of new proposals to fit that criteria.
Okay, and then the neighborhood support programs, was that new or supplementing existing?
That would be new. It's under 1E of our strategic plan, and it was to support neighborhood programs. So that would be a new add-on this year.
And I'm not quite sure what that means.
So yeah, so under our 1E, for instance, we had implement research-based preventative and educational programs. Some things we had: work with partners to increase the educational programming of inmates, support neighborhood programs such as police activity leagues, et cetera. So the thought behind that would be to put out 2 RFPs and see what we get back as ideas based in the community. And then we would convene a group to rate those RFPs and move forward with that. So it's a little bit, the details are not there, just the concept is there.
Okay, and then on the cut side, are we looking at the I was a little confused between I know the funding was going to pay for AB 109 jail beds, but we're trying to utilize some of the savings from the reduction from the zero bail. And are we trying to project a savings there, or is this?
It's both. It was to realize reductions to further, align with the strategic plan, but also, again, and the CAO brings up a good point to work with the Sheriff's Department in the coming weeks or two to get a better idea of those numbers.
And we'll have some indication of whether that continues on the long term, but what happens on the November ballot with the bail, a cash bail issue as well.
That's correct, Supervisor. I think we know that we're at significantly reduced numbers in the jail right now, but what those will look like over 12 months is a little hard to predict. What Dan and I'd like to do is work with the undersheriff and his team to try to refine the numbers a bit more before September, but so that we can better explain how the estimate was derived.
Okay, thank you. And then the cut looks like, is it victim witness in the DA's office? Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's the high tech.
Right.
What would, maybe Jonathan can address that, because I'm wondering what the impact there would be.
I can address that, Chair Fruitnick, if I have the floor.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have a few comments here, because as you can see, the DA's office has taken the biggest hit by percent, actually 6% more than anyone else who's a member. And you might recall we already took a 40% hit very recently. I want to talk about how the funding started when it was all based on AB 109. We knew that our office was doing far more AB 109 work than the funding that was provided. And our view at that point was just fund positions, because we know more staff and lawyers and support staff and investigators are being utilized to support AB 109 spending. And then as we started talking about the strategic plan, what we ended up doing is we ended up reallocating. We had victim services that does a great deal of AB 109 work and work with the strategic plan, a lot of work in the jails with inmates. So for instance, the big chunk of change there goes to one of our supervisors, and all his work is on neighborhood court, steps to success, mental health court, addiction intervention court. So that's all in line with the strategic plan. What I wish we had done when we shifted that money is there's a lot of work we're doing that's in line with the strategic plan that's not being funded by the CCP. It's just our money, general fund dollars from the county. And I wish we had reallocated that to some of those programs and personnel, because we do far more work than that 71.5 thousand. Now, that 71.5 thousand probably does, that portion of that unit does probably all AB 109 work in terms, and maybe some of you don't know that we do all the tech analysis for every law enforcement agency in the county. It used to be we went to a high-tech team in Sacramento, and our work sat in line and languished far too long, the analysis. Now we do it all, and these people are highly trained, and they're doing it, AB 109. It's all AB 109. But my feeling is that, again, I wish we had reallocated that, because there are personnel far more than what's listed that are doing the work that's in line with the strategic plan, because we're doing so much work in line with the strategic plan. So, I kind of want to see at this point, and I know we do have to vote on this under 1230.1B. We all have to vote on this, and that's what we've done every time. So we all have to agree to this. And I understand we all need to take hits. I just don't understand why our hit is 15% after already being cut 40,000. We have coordinated efforts to apply for grants for our collaborative programs. We have taken the lead on writing these grants when some of our partners, because of the work that goes into writing these grants, and they're really a lot to deal with, they didn't want to do it, so we did it. So we wrote these grants, we took the lead with our collaborative partners for mental health court mainly, and we administer those grants. So those grants, two in particular, one for mental health court and one for a new program with the Department of State Hospitals, we got funding. We don't get any of that funding. Like I said, we're administering these grants. Vast majority of the funding goes to Health and Human Services, and part of the funding goes to one probation officer. I feel like we're not going to be able to operate these programs in line with the strategic plan if we get cut an additional 71,000 thousand on top of the 40,000. And so we're going to have to find ways for savings, and it's probably going to come from these programs and personnel that are right in line with the strategic plan. What I feel like you're seeing high tech, so you're seeing what that is. And I'm not seeing how the funding is going to probation. So I'd really like to see an accounting of how all that funding that you're getting at probation is being allocated to probation, because I would bet that a large portion of it is not AB 109 related and is not in line with the strategic plan. And that's not what the money's going to be going for. And I think that's something that I and maybe others in the group would like to see. And I know that Tracy has been asking for this for a long, long time. I mean, we're more than happy to show you how our funding is going. It's really easy. It's all in line with the strategic plan or AB 109. So it's, as you can see, I'm a little frustrated here. We're doing such a vast amount of work in line with this county's strategic plan. And sadly, we're not going to be able to continue doing all of it if we have these cuts. And that's going to be a shame for our collaborative partners, for the citizens of Yolo County, and for the people that are really affected by the criminal justice system, and that's the people that are criminally justice involved and that are in our system. So that's my comment, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, other members' comments?
Yes, Chair, it's John Miller.
Oh, yes, Mr. Miller, Chief Miller, I should say. Go ahead.
I want to back up a lot of things that Jonathan, Mr. Raven said. I agree with a lot of his points. First of all, say that local law enforcement has no dog in the fight. We got cut almost 4 years ago. And I thought for the funding back then, now recognizing with more experience on CCP, that it was a fallacy trying to maintain the funding for law enforcement. One of the biggest issues, if you recall, was I was unable to show on behalf of local law enforcement how we were spending the money. I could not justify it in our meetings. And I don't have a problem getting cut because we were doing a very, very poor job spending the money and showing how we were spending the money on strategic plan related stuff. So again, I got no dog in the fight, but a couple of points I want to make. It sounds like the stakeholders were not involved in this decision. I mean, believe me, I know that running a budget and there's budget cuts to be made, it's very, very difficult. But I'm concerned that you didn't perhaps talk to the district attorney or the sheriff and bring them involved in the conversation on how these cuts were being made and what impact it's going to have on their programs that are aligned with the strategic plan. I'm very concerned about the new proposal, $175,000. You simply don't spend or bring on a new program or buy something new when you don't have the money to do it. I think the Results First initiative definitely shows us where some of our programs are successful, which ones are more bang for the buck, which I've always been all about. I think it's more important to save the programs that are successful, that we now do have a track record, than bringing on something new. And again, spending money you simply don't have. Finally, I do believe that there's going to be cuts, then I think that it has to be shared. I think that all departments to some degree, or all programs to some degree, have to share some of the cuts. Even if it's just how to put a token cut. But to leave some programs or some departments untouched and then really hitting some other departments very hard, I just don't think is a very good approach towards that. That's pretty much it for my comments.
Thank you. Any other comments from the CCP?
Jim Provenza, and of course I'm here as the board liaison, so I do think there would be support on the board for funding consistent with the strategic plan. On the other hand, I'd like to ask that you drill down a little bit more into these budgets. The DA's budget is very small compared to what the sheriff is receiving, and probation, and that you maybe look at this in a broader perspective so that one department isn't taking such a big hit.
Okay. Any other CCP comments?
I was just going to add, you know, there's going to be tough decisions to come. Looking at the next year's deficit, I mean, we're just in a systemic deficit, it strikes me. So we can't keep on doing business as usual and kicking the can down the road. It's time to make some hard decisions. And as I understand AB 109, as I played out, it's going to be less money every year. You know, it's a law of diminishing returns.
No, I understand that. And this has been a very, very difficult process. One thing, you know, I get Mr. Raven's comments about certain other areas and budgets completely. I think to an extent we could all potentially do that. I know for probation, in essence, we fund 100% Northern California construction training out of the probation budget. It doesn't come out of CCP. That could easily be shifted. It fits CCP perfectly. We're doing the pretrial risk assessment. Pretrial is funded by the CCP. We're doing a complete audit and analysis with an outside person this year, and we're funding that out of the probation budget to make sure that our risk assessment doesn't have any racial undertones to it. So I do completely understand what everybody's saying, and this is a very difficult process. With that, I'll open it up to public comment.
Can I make one more comment, Chair?
Yes, Ms. Raven.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, but let's be transparent. We're willing to be transparent, and we're willing to show how that 71,000 would cover far more than that with other personnel and programs that are directly in line with the strategic plan. So I'm asking, Chief, for you to be transparent too. I know that maybe all that money will go for programs like you discussed, consistent with the plans, the strategic plan, but let's all see it. And I think that's what Supervisor Provenza is asking for. We dig a little deeper. We're willing to do it. We've always been willing to do it. Let's be transparent so we can make a thoughtful decision based on facts, not just based on, you know, just seeing the money and making cuts. So that's my suggestion, and I'd like, hopefully we have support from everyone. I know that Tracy and I believe Karen, they've been asking for that for a long time. Let's do it.
Understood. Any other CCP comments? All right, with that, we'll open up to public comment. Lupita?
Yeah, Francesca Wright.
Go ahead, Ms. Wright.
Hello, thank you for allowing public comment on this. I think that we do represent stakeholders, and we're glad to have at least a small voice, even if it's heard or not. I had a couple comments. I do also agree with Karen. I think this is a move in the right direction. I'm concerned that actually, contrary to the DA's office comment, the greatest cuts percentage-wise was the administrator's office. And it feels to me that staffing, if you're going to move into using data-driven decision-making, you're going to need staff to pull that together. And if you're going to do anything around neighborhood involvement, you're going to need staff that can go out and do community outreach. So I think the idea of investing in neighborhoods is great. That's the one new program that I'm actually very excited about. But in my mind, that should not be driven by existing agencies, but any neighborhood program needs to be driven by those specific neighborhoods who have the highest involvement in the criminal justice system. These are neighborhoods that are under-resourced, that lack juvenile programs, youth development programs. And so if you move in that direction, I urge you to link it and make it community driven. The second point I'd like to make is evaluation. There's no mention in this budget for any program evaluation. I don't know how you can say that you support evidence-based practices if you don't invest in evaluation. But other than that, I think you all need to put your big boy pants on and look at your entire budgets and look at your mission. And the mission of the CCP is to reduce recidivism rates. And so 54% is what you just scored yourself. You need to be investing in programs that invest in people and helping keep people out of trouble and being to be successfully integrated into our communities. This is what the community wants. This is what families want. Please consider the lives that you're impacting by your assertions that your particular office deserves the least cuts. Think about the people that are involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Lupita, our next public comment.
Messi Soprano.
All right, go ahead.
Hello. I just wanted to say that one of the things that I looking at budgeting is really ratios and where money is invested in certain things and not necessarily in other things. And that when you look at budgets in policy situations, there's so much that you can do to put things in different pots and move things around. One of the things that I really do notice is that the DA office budget is a 2-to-1 allocation versus the public defender's budget. And one way that how that affects in essentially social justice issues is that people that are marginalized already and enter into these systems, they don't have anybody speaking for them except through the public defender's office a lot of times. And when you have a 2-to-1 ratio of allocations there, what it ends up happening is that their voices really get marginalized even further. Obviously, I'm not happy about that. I'd like to see things be much more equitable in that sense, and that is part of my comment here, and I hope it's taken in that sense. One of the reasons why I am really concerned is I've been attending these meetings, and the idea of stakeholders seems really kind of nebulous in these meetings. I just heard somebody mention how the DA office and different law enforcement agencies weren't invited to the table as stakeholders in something. And I would say that it's a shame if that's the case. However, on the other hand, there are many other stakeholders in the community that would have a lot of voice in this situation in the CCP, and it doesn't feel like there's much involvement and stakeholders outside of law enforcement. And this is a full community-wide effort, and so I'm really trying to help maybe get the sense across that what stakeholders is a really wide term. And the more that you minimize that term and minimize actual engagement of stakeholders, to talk to Francesca's point, neighborhood courts need neighborhoods and people in those neighborhoods. And it's not a law enforcement function if you want it to be a neighborhood function. So I really want to kind of push the CCP to think about what engagement means and how it can be broadened to bring other stakeholders to the table. And in terms of your budgeting, I also really want to say that moving around pots in certain ways, one of the things that you really don't want to do is take away uniformly blanketed across all the different departments, because it differentially affects a department who has a significantly less amount of money to utilize. So please don't do that. And that is my time, but I hope that you got those 2 points from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Lupita, our next public comment.
I don't have any additional hands raised, Chair.
Okay. I will open it back up to the CCP members for any comments that they would like to make.
Chair, it's Jonathan. I'd like to make a brief comment. We are the highest cut out of all the executive members. That's 15%. It's true the numbers are larger for staffing, and I think staffing is critical. I'm guessing that position is not going to be cut. It's going to be backfilled by general fund dollars. So I'm hoping that's the case, and maybe when I'm finished, maybe Mr. Blacklock can comment on that. The recidivism numbers are horrible. They are horrible, and we should all really dig down deep to try to work on decreasing that recidivism. And I'm guessing, well, I know this, that if we looked at arrests, those numbers would be much worse. And we haven't done that. We've just done it by conviction. So those are horrible numbers. Neighborhood court is run by pretty much all volunteers. It's all the community. That's why it's called neighborhood court. It's the neighbors. And so the people that sit on these panels, we usually have a facilitator and 2 panelists, all volunteers from the community. And they're the ones that work with the offender and sometimes the victim. And they're the ones that facilitate the restorative justice and come out with a decision to make the community whole. And for that program, the recidivism rate is far, far, far less than those numbers we looked at. So that's successful. And as many of you know, we started off with low-level misdemeanors, then we went to high-level misdemeanors. And for this grant we received recently, the goal in the grant is by year 3 to divert 10% of our felony cases charged into neighborhood court, which is really exciting. And it's what we should be doing. It's what the citizens of the county expect and deserve, and that's what we're doing. Thanks.
Any other CCP members for final comment? Seeing none, I will turn it over to CAO Blacklock to make any comments.
Thank you, Dan. And I'll just respond briefly to Jonathan, I think, in the comments, but a couple of things. One is that what we wanted to do today was to get general feedback that could help us to continue to refine the budgets. And yes, one of our goals is to sit down with departments to look at the big picture, not just the CCP budget, but the overall budget to see how we can mitigate the impacts of a CCP revenue reduction. So working with the undersheriff to refine those jail bed projections and then looking at that in the context of the entire budget. Working with Jonathan to refine what does that $71,000 reduction look like? And where might there be other opportunities to ensure that the high-tech program isn't unnecessarily impacted by it. And I'm fairly confident we'll be able to do that between now and September. And then one of the comments I heard that I thought was really good was the idea that we need to have more detail and transparency around where the budgets are being appropriated. And you may remember last year that we had departments do department-specific presentations on where exactly they were expending the funds as part of the budget, and we could bring those back and do another round of those this year. We've got that template already available, and I think it would be relatively easy to do that in upcoming CCP meetings. And then the last thing I think is the issue of, is it going to be the full CCP that meets going forward? And I think there's a lot of good reason why it should. We have a half a dozen full CCP members who aren't here today who didn't necessarily anticipate, as we didn't, that it would be a full CCP meeting. And I think including them going forward would be great to broaden, again, the diversity of the group. And then lastly, I know the public commented on public engagement, and that is a specific piece that is included within the CCP strategic plan. It has a specific goal as well as specific action items associated with that. And so I think that I would assume the CCP will want to continue talking about that at future meetings as well.
Thank you. With that, I do appreciate everybody's feedback, and we will close out the meeting. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.